How many times have you answered your phone and I'm sorry, you make a phone call to a business or whatever, and you hear, your call is very important to us. All of our operators are busy. You will be in a queue. You are number 49 in the queue, but you're not, your call is very important to us. And so my thought was, all of our lives, we receive many calls, and each one of them is very important to us. And it might be a major one, like, for example, entering the Sisters of St. Joseph. That definitely was a big call. But there's always calls to become more, to be more human, to be more loving, and God is waiting for us to answer our calls. So, what I thought I'd like to do is take some characters out of scripture, and I want you to go with me between the lines. And we're going to go back 2,000 years for a couple of these characters. And I'd like you to hear how they answered their call. And are you in any of these characters? The first person I'd like to introduce you to between the lines is Moses. And I got this material from Exodus chapter 3, verse 11 and following. A little piece that might make Moses more human to you is Moses was a Hebrew living under the strict control of Pharaoh. And Pharaoh had taken over the lands where the Hebrews were living. And Pharaoh was, I would say, a Gentile. He was like all the others of that following with many gods. So if you were married and you wanted a big family, you would pray to the goddess of fertility. Your husband is a farmer. He would pray to the god of good weather. So this is the kind of situation where these Hebrews were living. Now, Moses, when he was born, we have no name for his mother. As you've noticed, many times women aren't named in scripture. But his mother, knowing the situation they lived, she wanted to protect her son. And so you've heard the great story how she had a basket that was woven. It was lined with pitch or tar to keep it waterproof. Now, this is without a car seat. This is without all of the accoutrements that kids have today, but it was lined with probably a cloth, and Moses would put in that basket. Now, she lived near the Nile, and so to keep her eye on this baby, she was near the edge of the water there, and she saw one of Pharaoh's, many of their servants who was waiting on his daughter. And it was very common for a woman to go down into the reeds and the water of the Nile, and that's where they would bathe. So while the woman was there bathing in the Nile, she sees this basket. And we know the rest of the story. Her servant brings the child to her, and immediately Pharaoh's daughter, again nameless, saw this beautiful baby boy, and she wanted to keep the child. She could not breastfeed the baby because it was young. And so she found a Hebrew woman who was willing to breastfeed this baby, which happened to be part of Moses' Moses' family. So we go a little bit further and we find Moses growing up in, I'm going to say, the palace of the Pharaoh. So think about it. He was literate, he was given an education, he was well respected. In fact, some historians call him the Prince of Egypt, this Hebrew boy. And so he was very used to commanding interest, commanding respect. But on one occasion, he saw one of the Pharaoh's soldiers beating a Hebrew man, and he immediately went into the Hebrew man's protection by killing the soldier. This word, as you can imagine, got out real quickly, and he was lost all of his favor with Pharaoh, and now he's out on his own. The next time we meet him in scripture, he is married. Again, we have no idea what his wife's name was. And he was in the position of a shepherd. He was so poor that he didn't even own the sheep that he was responsible for. They were owned by his father-in-law. And it's this scene where the word call might come in. He's with his sheep and he notices, as we know, a burning bush. And it was unusual because it wasn't taken over by the flames and disappeared as ashes. It remained burning. And this is the most beautiful part of, I think, this story. He goes out of curiosity, you can imagine, and he hears the voice of Yahweh. And God speaks to him. And the first thing God said is, Moses. Notice he's calling him by name. Moses, take off your sandals, for you are standing on sacred ground or holy ground. I'd like to do a little PS here. As we read these stories, we have to remember a lot of it is symbolic. We can't take it word for word literally. Symbolic. In Moses' day, sandals were very important. And you can imagine they would walk from here to there. And in that climate, it was sandy. And so to take off your sandals at home is fine, but you wouldn't do it out in the open. Let's look at what was happening symbolically. And this might be where the idea of a call comes in. Take off your sandals. Get rid of whatever is holding you back from holy ground. Is it an attitude? Is it a weakness? Do you see what I mean? We have to symbolically think, in my life, what do I have to take off or get rid of so that I am free to stand on holy ground? Yahweh continues and he explains to Moses he is being called to save his people because they were in the position of slaves. He was to help them out of the slavery of Pharaoh. Now, I love this about Moses. Are you ready? 3 times Moses interrupts God with God's plan of saving all the Israelites. Here's the first one, and it starts with, but what do I tell him? Who should I say sent me? So Yahweh answers, I am who am, and he explains that. That's not good enough. The second time, guess what, Moses? But suppose they don't believe me. Then Yahweh patiently answers that problem. And here we go. This is the third one. Oh, but if you please, send somebody else. I've never been eloquent in speech. I'm slow of speech and tongue. Can you send somebody else? Can you picture that in our own lives? Oh, let somebody else do that. Any of this starting to become true in our own lives. And this is this amazing, loving Yahweh. God kind of becomes angry with Moses and he says, Moses, your brother Aaron, he is a good speaker. I will assist both you and Aaron in speaking, and I will teach you what to say. In other words, symbolically, God is there, and so are other people. When we are called, just like Lily Tomlin wanted to know who she was speaking to, when we are called, we also hear this call either through other people or like Moses, we have the support of other people. And if you notice, we never are alone. God is there, and God promised, and he kept his promise. He was with Moses, and he did free his people. You ready for another journey? We're going to go between the lines, but this time it's in the New Testament. And this is found in Luke chapter 1, verse 13. And you're going to meet a man named Zechariah. Now, let's go back 2,000 years. And I'd like to give you the job description of Zechariah. First of all, he was a priest. Now, the only people that could work or serve in the temple were people of the tribe of Levi. Not to be confused with genes, okay? The Levi genes have nothing to do with the tribe of Levi. But if you were a member of the tribe of Levi, you were the only ones that could work in the temple. So he was a Levite. He was literate, which wasn't a common thing for all people, especially women, but even some men. He served in the temple. He was well respected. Now we find Zechariah not only in the temple, but in the Holy of Holies. And this was a section set off only for a priest, high priest to enter. You and I, normal, regular people, were not allowed inside the Holy of Holies. And this is interesting. You're a priest in the tribe of Levi. Only once in your entire life can you go into the Holy of Holies. And this happens around the Jewish Passover. So picture yourself, we're in the Holy of Holies with Zechariah, and all of the people have to wait outside. They were not allowed in there, and they were praying while he was in the temple, Holy of Holies. He burns this incense. And the incense, of course, rises again symbolically. And every time we go to Mass or a service and there's incense, it's purely not only just to smell up the church, but it's symbolic of prayers rising. So people are out in the temple court watching this smoke or incense. Does it remind you of when a pope is elected? People wait outside the piazza for the smoke to come, and the color of the smoke determines if the vote has been passed. People are outside. He is on the inside, and the main part of their prayers were waiting for the Messiah. He was praying for the Messiah. Keep that in the back of your mind, because all of a sudden, Angel Gabriel appears. Now, I think we need our imaginations. What happens when an angel appears to you? What does that look like? But the best part of this is, remember I told you his background, priest, well respected. So here's this Gabriel standing in front of the man who knows all the laws and the rules of the Old Testament. He's very well versed. Gabriel stands there, and Gabriel says, Zechariah, called by name, your prayers are answered. Your wife Elizabeth will have a son named John, who will turn many Israelites to God. A little caveat, the way Elizabeth is described, she is old, she is barren, and a little piece of that is whenever a woman is called barren, obviously she's not having children. If it's a fertility issue, it's always that she's barren. We never hear about a sperm count or anything like that, but it's the woman who's barren. And she has lived under that all of their marriage, no child. And so here is Gabriel saying, your wife will have a son, and this will be the man who will turn many Israelites to God. Now, picture this high priest. This is way too big for him to believe. He just cannot swallow this. Plus, looking at whatever an angel looks like. And he looks to Gabriel and he says, this is too much. What is this? In other words, get this symbolically again, Zechariah is asking for proof. How can this happen? He wants proof. Now, I'd like you to picture this archangel. And he answers, I am Gabriel. I stand before God, and I was sent to you. I was sent to announce the good news. But now you will be speechless and unable to talk until the day that these things take place, because you did not believe my words. So here is the priest with all the credentials of the world behind him, and he has to have proof of this good news. So do you notice that even though Zechariah didn't believe God and needed proof, God didn't take back his promise? He just made Zechariah wait a little bit before it was before that baby was in his hands. But God never left him, even though he needed proof. We're going to go back to the New Testament, and I'd like to take a look at Mary. And this is going to be Luke 1, verse 26. Remember a minute ago, Zechariah got his news, and he was just too much. It was just too big. He needed more proof. I'd like to introduce you by looking between the lines. What was Mary's stance? Now, number one, Mary was probably 14 or 15 years old. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, she is like a junior high kid or a sophomore and freshman or sophomore in high school. And so let's think of her life. She lived in Nazareth, which was a backwater town. It was very unremarkable, and I loved this. They only had one well in this small village because the water supply was so poor. So are you okay kind of getting the setting of where this was her home? And we read that Mary was also visited by Gabriel. He has to be burnt out, must be exhausted, all these missions. So now he's meeting with this young teenage girl. And we read in that definition of Mary that she was betrothed. Now, I found this very interesting in Israeli history. If you are betrothed, there's three steps to that. Number one, the two fathers of the bride and the groom, they do the meeting. It's an arranged marriage, and it has to be an okay on the part of both fathers. Then the second step is then Mary and Joseph, who knew each other in this small town, they both have to agree. Yes, I would take Joseph as my spouse after he had been chosen. She did have both of them did have a say in yes, or this is okay. Then the third step is the actual marriage. And I found this interesting. Remember, this is about 2,000 years ago. So don't think of bridal parties or, the getaways with all the bridesmaids and whatever. What happens during that year is the groom builds a house or a small house that they're going to live in. And he builds it next to his parents' home and where his older brother built the home for his wife and their children. Can you see they live in a compound that's really under the auspices of the groom? So during that year, Joseph probably was busy building, and we understand, a carpenter's background, building the little house that they were going to live in inside this compound. And the marriage takes place when the groom to be has the house ready. And so sometimes, when that gospel where there were the wise bridesmaids and the foolish ones, and they were waiting to help the bride move all of her stuff. In the meantime, like Sandy a minute ago, her pots, her pans, her clothing, her possessions. And that's what a bridesmaid did, much different like today. So the bridesmaids would help her move into this house. Now, if the groom is ready, maybe let's say the late afternoon before dusk, that's where that gospel came in. They needed their lamps lit because this is apparently going to be done in the evening. You remember that gospel and some of those bridesmaids, their lamps, they had no oil, they weren't ready. So now Mary moves in with Joseph. That's when the marriage happens. And the marriage happens in either in a temple, in the synagogue. But can you see what that betrothed means? There were three steps to that. And Mary is at the very beginning of these three steps. She's betrothed to Joseph. Now, think of Zachariah's response. Look at this young teenage girl, illiterate, small town, and here's hers. After Gabriel has made his announcement, she was greatly troubled, and she now wants more information. And she says, how can this be since I have no relations with a man? She's on the first step of this betrothal, and that's all. How can this happen? I have no relations with a man. She didn't want proof. She just wanted information. How can this be? And it was a very logical answer when you think about it. And Gabriel, boy, he was off the hook. He didn't have to get mad like he did at Zachariah. And he says to her, do not be afraid. You will bear a son, and you will name him Jesus. And he went on to explain how she was going to turn the tide of humanity with her decision. And if you notice in the gospel a little later, say, she pondered and took all of this in. And isn't that part of what we talk about when we make a decision? We have a scale. What are the pros? What are the cons? And that's what Mary did. She pondered. And her answer, I'm sure that pondering is, and like you just mentioned, that decision isn't clear cut. It goes on. Remember when you were mentioning that, how it goes on and on. And she answers, behold, in other words, look and see. I am the handmaid of the Lord. I'm willing to believe. I'm willing to take on socially what it means to be betrothed and not married yet, and yet to be pregnant. So put that in mind with this woman so full of faith, facing socially in that day what would go on. Unmarried, pregnant, hasn't moved in with her husband yet in their house. I just want to bring that out between the lines to appreciate this amazing young woman answering her call, just like we answer our calls or our decisions. Completely relying on God, just the way Gabriel promised her it would happen. And as we heard a minute ago, our help is there. It's there for us. All we need to do is accept it. And I'm just going to add a real quick PS. Today's the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And remember, this Juan Diego was an indigenous Indian, poor, of no substance. And notice that's who Mary went and appeared to, just like Mary in our gospel here. And I love this one write up about Juan Diego. He said, I'm so poor. I'm just a peasant. Are you sure you want a guy? Are you sure I'm the one you're looking for? Do you notice God's pattern? It's from everyday people. It's no one of a lot of wealth and it's us. It's you and I on this screen right here. We've all had to make decisions, and we've been supported through it all the way.